She walked onto Yale's stage, and they laughed when she adjusted the microphone that stood too tall for her 5'2" frame. Their snickers died in their throats as her opening statement sliced through the auditorium with surgical precision, leaving nothing but stunned silence in its wake. What happened next would not only shatter the glass ceiling of Yale's prestigious debate tournament, but would expose the fault lines running beneath the polished veneer of the entire Ivy League establishment. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The grand halls of Yale University buzzed with anticipation as the nation's brightest young debaters gathered for the prestigious invitational tournament. Chandeliers cast golden light over mahogany panels and portraits of distinguished alumni who seemed to watch with critical eyes. Among the polished elites in designer suits and perfectly pressed Oxford shirts, 17-year-old Olivia Johnson from the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans stood out like a wildflower in a manicured garden. Her thrifted navy blazer, slightly faded at the elbows, and unmistakable southern lilt drew more sneers than smiles from her competitors. "Did you hear her accent? How did someone like that even qualify?" whispered a boy from Phillips Exeter, loud enough for Olivia to hear as she passed by. Another voice chimed in, "Probably some diversity initiative." The words landed like tiny daggers, but Olivia kept her chin high, pretending not to notice how conversations hushed when she approached study groups, or how seats beside her remained conspicuously empty during orientation. She could feel every dismissive glance and hear every cruel whisper as she clutched her battered notebook, her lifeline filled with speeches and strategies scribbled during late-night study sessions at her kitchen table, while other competitors had private coaches and debate camps on their resumes. Olivia had YouTube tutorials and her mother, who stayed up after double shifts to help her practice, despite barely understanding the complex policy arguments herself. "But you're twice as smart as any of them," her mother had assured her that morning over their crackly phone connection. "They just don't know it yet." The sting of exclusion only fueled her determination as she eyed the grand stage, where victory seemed designed for anyone but her. The tournament bracket displayed on a massive screen showed her first-round pairing against last year's runner-up from a prestigious boarding school. Several spectators exchanged knowing glances when they saw the matchup, clearly expecting a quick and merciless elimination. Olivia gripped her notebook tighter, its worn cover smooth beneath her fingertips, feeling the weight of every sacrifice that had brought her here. The Yale debate tournament wasn't just a competition, it was her one chance to prove that brilliance didn't require pedigree. Whispers turned into laughter the moment she entered the lecture hall. Led by the tournament's golden boy, William Carter III, Yale's own prodigy, dripping with charisma and privilege. The sound rippled through the ornate room like a wave, washing over Olivia as she clutched her note cards tighter. She could feel their eyes on her thrift store blazer and scuffed shoes, marking her as an outsider among the polished elite. "Who let her in?" William jeered, his voice carrying deliberately across the hall. His perfect teeth flashed in a smile that never reached his eyes. Didn't realize this was a charity event. His friends, a carefully curated collection of legacy students, echoed his mockery with practiced cruelty. One girl with pearl earrings worth more than Olivia's entire wardrobe snickered behind a manicured hand. Another boy, whose father's name graced one of the campus buildings, made a show of checking the tournament roster with exaggerated confusion. Olivia's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze locked on the event coordinator, Professor Evelyn Grant. The woman was known throughout academic circles for her ruthless standards and icy demeanor. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her steel-rimmed glasses magnified eyes that had witnessed decades of academic blood sport. She was currently reviewing her notes, seemingly oblivious to the social execution happening before her. "I heard she's from some community college in the middle of nowhere," William continued, his voice a perfect balance of amusement and disdain. "Probably got lost looking for the cafeteria." This earned another round of appreciative laughter from his entourage. Olivia swallowed hard, feeling her carefully prepared arguments dissolving under the acid of their contempt. She'd spent months preparing for this moment, sacrificing sleep and social life to earn her spot. Yet in seconds, they'd reduced her to a punchline. When William's mockery grew louder, something unexpected happened. Professor Grant's head snapped up, her gaze locking onto him with laser precision. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as she silenced him with a single, cutting look. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice quiet, yet somehow filling every corner of the hall. "Perhaps you could direct that enthusiasm toward your opening statement, which I believe you're scheduled to deliver in approximately 7 minutes. The laughter died instantly. William's smile faltered, momentarily shifting the room's attention to Olivia's silent resilience. In that brief moment of reprieve, Olivia unclenched her jaw and straightened her shoulders. She hadn't come this far to be dismissed before she'd spoken a single word. The opening ceremony of Yale's annual debate tournament buzzed with animated conversations as students from America's most prestigious schools mingled in the grand hall. Olivia stood awkwardly at the periphery, clutching her folder of notes as she watched groups form with the practiced ease of those who'd known each other for years. Princeton sending their strongest team since 2009, she overheard a Harvard sophomore boast to appreciative nods. Another circle erupted in laughter as someone recounted their summer internship at the Supreme Court. These weren't just students, they were dynasties in human form, their confidence built on generations of privilege. After an hour of failed attempts to join conversations, met with polite smiles that quickly turned away, Olivia retreated to the library's 3rd floor, where ancient law volumes gathered dust and silence reigned. Here, surrounded by the musty scent of leather-bound books, she felt her breathing steady. She spread her materials across the worn oak table, constitutional precedents, logical fallacy guides, and printouts of admission statistics she'd memorized like prayers. They might have connections, but you have conviction, her mother had whispered that morning before her bus departed. That counts for more than they'll ever know. While others attended the mixer dinner, trading stories of family vacations to the Maldives and debate camps in Switzerland, Olivia remained hunched over her notes. The janitorial staff found her there at 9:30, apologetically informing her the library was closing. Walking back to her budget hotel, she overheard tournament participants spilling out of an expensive restaurant, someone casually mentioning their father's friend on Yale's admissions committee. Olivia's stomach tightened. Not from hunger, but from the stark reminder of what she was up against. That night, lying on the lumpy hotel mattress, something hardened within her. The day's humiliations crystallized into a cold, clear purpose. She wasn't here to make friends or network or collect business cards for future opportunities. She was here to win, to force them to see her, to acknowledge her worth not through her background but through her mind. Tomorrow, when the actual debates began, she wouldn't just participate in Yale's tournament, she would own it. The first elimination round dawned under Yale's imposing Gothic arches, the venue more courtroom than classroom. Olivia's name was listed last, a clear message from the organizers about her perceived worth. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the polished oak floors where 17 years of debate champions had stood before. Olivia ran her finger down the competitor list posted outside the hall, her stomach tightening when she found herself at the very bottom. Not alphabetical, not random. A deliberate placement that screamed outsider. William Harrington from Princeton took the stage first, his tailored blazer and confident stride announcing his pedigree before he spoke a single word. The audience of professors, students, and alumni leaned forward as his voice filled the chamber, dazzling them with rehearsed eloquence on international trade policy. His arguments flowed with practiced precision, peppered with quotes from economists and Supreme Court justices. The judges nodded appreciatively, pens scratching approval across their scoring sheets. From her seat in the back row, Olivia listened intently, her mind working like a chess player seeing 5 moves ahead. She dissected every argument, noted every logical gap, and scribbled potential counterpoints in her worn notebook. Unlike her competitors, who scrolled through tablets and laptops, her tools were simple: a pencil, paper, and the library of facts she'd committed to memory. When William concluded to enthusiastic applause, 3 more competitors followed, each impressive in their delivery but predictable in their approaches. Nearly 2 hours later, the moderator finally called Olivia Chen, Community College of Philadelphia. A few whispers rippled through the audience, some confused, others dismissive. Olivia rose from her seat, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered her notes. The walk to the podium felt endless, each step echoing in the cavernous space. Yet her heart remained steady, her mind clear. She refused to be an afterthought, to accept the narrative they'd written for her before she'd spoken a single word. As she placed her notes on the podium and looked out at the sea of expectant faces, something shifted inside her. The trembling in her hands stopped. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her opening words were soft but fierce. "Thank you for this invitation, even if some believe I shouldn't be here." A ripple of shocked laughter swept the hall, but Olivia pressed on, her voice finding strength with each syllable. She hadn't rehearsed in front of mirrors like William did, couldn't afford the luxury of a private speaking coach, but authenticity radiated from her like heat. Last year, only 11% of national debate finalists came from public schools like mine, she stated, her eyes scanning the room. Yet we represent 85% of American students. She paused, letting the numbers hang in the air before citing the Harrington v. Educational Board case that had exposed funding disparities affecting competitive academic programs. The audience shifted uncomfortably as Olivia methodically dismantled assumptions. She wasn't just arguing the assigned topic, she was challenging the very framework of the debate itself. Professor Winters, seated at the judges' table, leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable but attentive. "When I was 14, Olivia continued, her voice momentarily softening, my debate teacher told me I'd never advance beyond regionals because I lacked the proper pedigree." She allowed herself a small smile. "I've kept his email as my phone background for 3 years. William glanced at his teammates, clearly unsettled by the audience's reaction. Olivia wasn't playing by the established rules of these tournaments. She was speaking with a directness that cut through academic pretension. Her arguments were meticulously researched, but delivered with a conversational intensity that made statistical evidence feel personal. By the 4-minute mark, something remarkable happened. The subtle shuffling and whispered comments had ceased completely. The entire hall sat transfixed. Even the timekeeper seemed to forget his duty, letting her continue several seconds past her allotted time before reluctantly raising the warning card. As Olivia concluded, she didn't employ William's practiced dramatic pause or theatrical hand gesture. She simply thanked the judges and returned to her seat. The silence that followed wasn't the awkward pause that had greeted her arrival on stage. It was something else entirely, a collective moment of recalibration. Professor Winters made a note on his judging sheet, his pen pressing harder than necessary. For the first time since she'd arrived at Yale, Olivia felt truly seen, not as an oddity or a diversity statistic, but as a formidable intellectual force who belonged exactly where she stood. Scattered applause followed her speech, more sincere than loud. A few judges nodded appreciatively, but most remained stoic, their expressions unreadable behind years of competitive debate experience. Olivia stepped away from the podium, her hands still trembling slightly as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. William's smirk as she passed him said everything without a single word. "Cute speech, let's see if it matters." She kept her head high, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her doubt herself. Something in the room had shifted, though. She felt it in the way a few competitors were looking at her now, not with dismissal, but with recalculation. "Not bad for someone who shouldn't be here," whispered Tara, squeezing her arm as Olivia took her seat. The remaining speeches blurred together as Olivia replayed her performance in her mind, cataloguing every stumble, every moment where her voice had wavered. Had it been enough? The judges' faces revealed nothing as the preliminary round concluded. 2 hours later, the competitors huddled around the bulletin board where the preliminary scores were posted. Bodies pressed forward, a tangle of designer blazers and nervous energy. Olivia hung back, her stomach knotted with anticipation. She watched as faces lit up with relief or crumpled with disappointment. "You should check," said Tara, nudging her forward. Olivia squeezed through the crowd, scanning the list for her name. Her finger traced down the rankings. 1, 2, 3. She wasn't in the top 10. Her heart sank as she continued down. 11, 12. Olivia Mendez, 12th place. She had made the cut, just barely, but she was in. "Congratulations," said a voice behind her. Professor Jenkins stood there, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You surprised some people today." "Including myself," Olivia admitted. Across the room, William was surrounded by his usual admirers, celebrating his first-place preliminary ranking. His eyes met hers briefly, narrowing when he realized she'd advanced. She'd survived the first cut, defying every expectation set for her, including her own. The real challenge was just beginning. But for now, seeing her name on that list felt like the first real victory she'd had since arriving at Yale. The notification lit up her phone screen at 11:37 that night. Olivia had been sprawled across her twin bed, surrounded by debate note cards, when her mother's message arrived. "You got this, baby. Make them listen." She smiled faintly, running her thumb across the words before setting the phone down beside her stack of research. Her cramped dorm room felt even smaller tonight, the walls pressing in as she contemplated tomorrow's challenge. The tournament organizers had just released the next round's topic, and Olivia had stared at it for a full minute before letting out a bitter laugh. Affirmative action. Of all possible topics, they'd chosen the one policy that her opponents would assume had paved her way to Yale. "Perfect," she muttered, pushing herself up against her headboard. She'd either have to defend the very policy that made people question her legitimacy, or argue against something that had helped students like her access institutions like Yale. The irony wasn't lost on her. Olivia glanced at the photos taped above her desk. Her mother in nurse's scrubs, her little brother at his middle school science fair, the three of them at her high school graduation. None of them had ever had anything handed to them. Doubt crept in like a cold draft. What if Prescott was right? What if she was just a token, selected to make Yale look progressive? The thought made her stomach clench. She reached for her phone again, reading her mother's message one more time. Make them listen, not make them like you or prove them wrong. Just make them listen. That was what debate had always been about for her. Olivia took a deep breath and opened her laptop. If she was going to face this topic, she'd need to be prepared for every angle, every statistic, every historical precedent. She'd need to anticipate the traps they'd set, the loaded questions, the false equivalencies, the appeals to meritocracy that ignored systemic barriers. She began typing furiously, organizing her thoughts into a framework that could withstand whatever came her way. The doubt was still there, lurking at the edges of her mind, but her mother's words had given her something stronger to hold on to. They wanted her to fail. They expected her to crack under pressure. But Olivia Santiago had never been what people expected, and tomorrow would be no exception. The air hung heavy in the debate hall the next morning, charged with anticipation and unspoken tension. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust particles that danced above the polished wooden podium. William took the stage with his trademark confidence, his navy blazer impeccably pressed, his voice resonating with practiced authority as he delivered another seemingly flawless performance. With surgical precision, he subtly twisted the narrative, framing the debate around individual merit and hard work, implicitly casting doubt on students like Olivia, who challenged the status quo. "Excellence requires sacrifice," he proclaimed, scanning the room with practiced eye contact. "Those who truly deserve to be here prove it through their achievements, not through complaints about the system." Several judges nodded approvingly, making notes on their evaluation sheets. When Olivia's turn came, she approached the podium slowly. The room seemed to hold its breath. She began quietly, almost hesitantly, but there was a new steadiness in her voice that commanded attention. She built her case methodically, brick by logical brick, her argument rising like an unstoppable tide. Meritocracy, she explained, was often a comfortable facade that privileged people used to justify their advantages. The playing field was never level, she stated, her voice growing stronger. "We celebrate the runners who cross the finish line first, without acknowledging that some began miles ahead." She gestured toward the audience, making deliberate eye contact with specific sections. "How many here would have made it without private tutors, without family networks opening doors, without the safety net that allowed you to take risks?" The room's silence was deafening. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding each other's eyes. Even the judges appeared unsettled, their pens momentarily still. For the first time since the tournament began, William's composure faltered. A muscle twitched in his jaw as he scribbled furious notes, his fountain pen pressing so hard it nearly tore through the paper. "This isn't about lowering standards," Olivia continued, her voice clear in the hushed room. "It's about acknowledging the invisible advantages that shape who gets to compete in the first place." She paused, letting her words settle like stones in still water. "Excellence matters, but so does honesty about how we define and measure it." Olivia stepped up to the podium, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about being heard. She took a deep breath and launched into her rebuttal with a clarity that silenced the room. "When I was 11 years old, my mother lost her job because she questioned a corporate policy that harmed local communities," she began, her voice steady despite the personal revelation. "That's not just my story. It's the story of 3.4 million Americans who face similar retaliation annually, according to the Labor Department's suppressed 2022 report." The judges leaned forward. No one had cited this data because few knew it existed. Olivia had spent nights digging through obscure government databases that William's team, with all their resources, hadn't bothered to explore. "And the opposition claims economic progress requires sacrifice," she continued, dismantling William's arguments point by point. "But whose sacrifice? The data shows corporate whistleblower protections create more stable markets, not less." As she concluded, the applause erupted faster than before, fuller, more genuine. Professor Grant's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the permanent furrow between her brows relaxing as she made a notation on her scoring sheet. For the briefest moment, their eyes met, and Olivia caught something she hadn't seen before: recognition. The next morning, Olivia refreshed the tournament brackets on her phone, nearly dropping it when she saw her name listed 7th for quarterfinals. She had advanced further than anyone from Westridge had in 15 years. "Congratulations," said Maya, squeezing her arm as they walked toward the cafeteria. "You've already made history for our school." Olivia smiled. But the weight of what lay ahead pressed on her shoulders. As they rounded the corner, William's debate teammates huddled near the water fountain, their voices dropping as she approached. "Here comes Yale's charity case," one muttered just loud enough for her to hear. Another snickered. "Let's see how she handles tomorrow's topic." Olivia kept walking, chin high, but unease crept through her. The comment seemed too specific, too confident. In tournament rules, topics were supposed to be sealed until 2 hours before each round. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to Maya once they were out of earshot. Maya frowned. "You think they know something we don't?" Olivia nodded slowly. "And I think I need to find out what." Something wasn't right, and with everything she'd worked for hanging in the balance, she couldn't afford to ignore her instincts. Olivia's phone buzzed at 11:37 that night, squinting at the bright screen. She saw an email from what appeared to be the Yale debate committee address. Her heart nearly stopped as she read the subject line: "Urgent topic change for championship round." The message explained that due to recent world events, the committee had decided to alter tomorrow's debate topic to focus on international trade sanctions instead of educational reform. All participants were required to adapt accordingly. "This can't be happening," she whispered, staring at her laptop, where 12 hours of meticulous research lay organized in color-coded folders. Her entire strategy, her carefully crafted arguments, her statistical evidence, all suddenly worthless. For a moment, she considered emailing Professor Grant to confirm, but the late hour and the official-looking email header convinced her this was legitimate. The tournament rules explicitly stated that topic changes, while rare, were within the committee's rights. With trembling hands, Olivia closed her completed files and opened a new document. Sleep would have to wait. She downed 3 cups of coffee as the night stretched into early morning, her eyes burning as she frantically researched trade policy, economic impacts, and historical precedents. By 5 in the morning, she had cobbled together what felt like a fragile framework of arguments, nowhere near as robust as her original preparation. When she finally collapsed onto her bed, the sun was already peeking through her curtains. 3 hours later, she arrived at the debate hall, dark circles under her eyes and clutching her hastily assembled notes. She spotted Professor Grant near the registration table and approached him to confirm some last-minute details about the new topic. "What new topic?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "We're proceeding with educational reform as planned." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. "But the email from the committee last night—" "We sent no such email," Professor Grant said, now looking annoyed. "The topics are locked in weeks in advance. You should know that." As the horrible truth dawned on her, Olivia glanced across the room. There stood William, surrounded by his Harvard teammates, watching her conversation with undisguised interest. When their eyes met, his lips curled into a smile that never reached his eyes. He raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. She had 15 minutes until the championship debate began. 15 minutes to recall everything she'd originally prepared and somehow reorganize her thoughts. As she rushed to a quiet corner, her exhaustion battling with rising panic, one thought crystallized through the fog of her fatigue. William had orchestrated this. Somehow, he'd sent that fake email, and he was counting on her to fail. Olivia's hands trembled as she stared at the closed door of the auditorium. The muffled sounds of the debate continuing inside felt like a mockery. Walking away would be so easy. No one would blame her after what happened, but something fierce ignited within her. "No," she whispered to herself, "I didn't come this far to quit." She spotted an abandoned notepad on a nearby table and snatched it up, along with a pen someone had left behind. Finding a quiet corner in the hallway, she slid down against the wall and began scribbling frantically. 5 minutes. That's all she had before her turn in the impromptu round. No research, no preparation, just raw thoughts spilling onto paper. The timer on her phone counted down mercilessly as she outlined points about technology's paradoxical nature, how it connected people across continents while isolating those sitting beside each other. She thought about her grandmother, who could video chat with relatives overseas, but couldn't get her own grandchildren to look up from their phones at Sunday dinner. She recalled the ghostly blue glow illuminating faces in darkened rooms, everyone together yet profoundly alone. When the coordinator poked her head out and called, "Olivia Chen, you're up!" she took one deep breath and walked back through those doors, notepad clutched like a shield. The snickers started immediately. William's supporters exchanged knowing glances. Professor Harrington checked his watch, clearly expecting a train wreck. "My prepared remarks were stolen today," she began, her voice initially quavering, but steadying with each word. "But perhaps that's fitting for a discussion about technology and human connection. Because when everything is stripped away, our devices, our carefully crafted presentations, what remains is simply our humanity." She spoke about digital addiction not as a distant concept, but as the lived reality of her generation. She described dating apps where people became disposable with a swipe, and social media platforms that turned friendship into a performance. But she also acknowledged technology's power to unite movements, support isolated individuals, and democratize information. "The question isn't whether technology connects or disconnects us," she said, making eye contact with William for the first time since she'd begun. "It's whether we're brave enough to use it intentionally, to enhance our humanity rather than replace it." By the time she finished, the room had fallen completely silent. Even William's expression had shifted from smug certainty to something resembling respect, or perhaps concern. He glanced down at his own meticulously prepared notes and, for the first time that day, looked uncertain about what would come next. Olivia stared at the rankings in disbelief, her finger tracing down the list until it stopped at her name. 5th place. She had advanced to the semi-finals despite everything. The room buzzed with excited chatter as competitors gathered around the results. But Olivia's attention was drawn across the crowded hall to where William stood, his phone frozen midway to his ear. The look on his face, a mixture of shock and barely contained rage, told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't expected her to survive his little stunt. "Congratulations," whispered Zoe, appearing at her side. "You absolutely crushed that rebuttal on economic policy. The judges were practically taking notes." Olivia managed a smile, but her mind was racing. Someone had deliberately tried to derail her, and she had a pretty good idea who was behind it. Before she could respond to Zoe, she noticed Professor Grant signaling discreetly from the doorway. "I'll catch up with you later," Olivia told Zoe, then made her way across the room. Professor Grant led her to an empty classroom, closing the door before speaking. "The IT department traced the email," she said without preamble. "It came from a spoofed address, untraceable, but sophisticated enough that it had to be someone with technical knowledge." Olivia's fists clenched at her sides. "It was William. I know it was." "We don't have proof," Grant cautioned, her voice low. "And making accusations without evidence could backfire spectacularly. My advice, keep your head down, focus on the semi-finals, and don't give anyone ammunition to use against you." The professor's words made practical sense, but something inside Olivia had shifted. The sabotage attempt had awakened a determination she hadn't known she possessed. She thought of her mother working double shifts, of the scholarship that had barely covered her expenses, of every person who had ever underestimated her. "With all due respect, Professor," Olivia replied, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath, "I won't hide. Someone tried to sabotage me, and I intend to win anyway." She straightened her shoulders. "In fact, I'm going to rewrite my entire argument for tomorrow. If they're watching me that closely, I'll give them something they haven't prepared for." Grant studied her for a long moment before the corner of her mouth twitched upward. "I suspected you might say that." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "These are some research materials that might help. Just be careful, Olivia. Some people play very dirty when they feel threatened." Olivia felt a surge of relief when the semi-final topic was announced. Digital activism versus grassroots organizing. Which creates more lasting social change? This was her wheelhouse. While other competitors scrambled for research materials, she simply closed her eyes, recalling how her small town had mobilized both online and offline after the flood 3 years ago. The hashtag campaign that had brought national attention, the local meetings in church basements, the way digital tools had amplified voices that would have otherwise gone unheard. Her opponent, Priya Singh from Westfield Academy, carried herself with the polished confidence that came from 4 years of debate championships and private coaching. Tall and poised in her tailored blazer, Priya had a reputation for dismantling opponents with surgical precision. Whispers around the tournament suggested she'd already received early acceptance to Harvard. Digital activism creates noise, not change, Priya argued in her opening statement. It's slacktivism, the illusion of impact without sacrifice or commitment. Her delivery was flawless, her evidence meticulously curated from academic journals and policy papers. When Olivia's turn came, she stepped to the podium without notes. 3 years ago, my town was underwater, she began. Her voice steady. We had no electricity, no cell service. Traditional organizing started in shelters. But when one person got signal and posted our situation, everything changed. She detailed how online campaigns had directed resources where government response had failed, how digital tools had coordinated volunteers, and how virtual communities had sustained momentum long after news cameras left. Digital activism doesn't replace boots on the ground, Olivia concluded. And it amplifies them. It connects isolated efforts into movements. My community isn't just theory or statistics. We're living proof that the false dichotomy between digital and grassroots organizing misses the point. The most powerful change happens when they work together. During cross-examination, Priya tried to trap Olivia with technical questions about campaign metrics and policy implementation, but Olivia's responses, grounded in lived experience rather than theory, resonated with judges and audience alike. When the decision was announced, Olivia would advance to finals. The applause started hesitantly, then grew. She caught Professor Winter's eye in the crowd. The older woman nodded once, a gesture so slight most would miss it, but Olivia understood its significance. She wasn't just some charity case anymore, she had earned her place. As she gathered her materials, Priya approached. That was unexpected, she said, extending her hand. Good luck tomorrow. The words were correct, but her eyes betrayed her shock at being bested by the scholarship student from nowhere. As Olivia left the stage, Professor Grant approached, voice low. The final round won't just test your skill. William has connections in places that matter here. His eyes darted around the emptying auditorium. His father sits on the board of trustees, and 3 of the 5 judges tomorrow were his father's classmates. Olivia felt her stomach tighten. She'd suspected the playing field wasn't level, but this confirmation still stung. So what am I supposed to do? Give up? She asked, clutching her notes tightly. No, Grant replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm telling you to prepare for everything. William will stop at nothing to protect his status. I've seen him destroy opponents with personal attacks disguised as rhetorical flourishes. He paused, his expression softening. But I've never seen anyone with your raw talent either. That night, Olivia barely slept. She rehearsed arguments until dawn, anticipating every possible angle William might take. By morning, her eyes were bloodshot, but her mind was razor-sharp. The morning of the finals, the auditorium overflowed with students, faculty, and local media. Word had spread about the unlikely showdown, the underdog from New Orleans versus Yale's own favorite son. Olivia spotted several news cameras and a reporter from the Yale Daily News interviewing students near the entrance. As she made her way to the preparation room, whispers followed her, some supportive, others dismissive. A group of William's friends from the debate society watched her pass, their smirks barely concealed. "Don't let them get to you," came a voice beside her. It was Maya, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you might need this." "Thanks," Olivia said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Is it always this intense?" Maya laughed. "The finals? Yes, but this year is different. You've become something of a symbol." She lowered her voice. "Half the campus is rooting for you to take William down a peg." Through the preparation room window, Olivia could see William arriving, surrounded by his entourage. He moved with practiced confidence, shaking hands with faculty members, his smile never reaching his eyes. When he caught sight of Olivia watching, he held her gaze for a moment before giving her a small, condescending nod. "He thinks he's already won," Olivia murmured. "Then he's made his first mistake," Maya replied, "because you haven't even started fighting yet." The auditorium vibrated with thunderous applause as William took center stage. His supporters, strategically placed in the front rows, erupted in cheers that seemed designed to intimidate. Dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit, he commanded the podium with practiced ease, his voice resonating with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. His opening argument painted Yale as the venerable guardian of academic excellence and integrity, a sanctuary where only the truly deserving should tread. Each point flowed seamlessly into the next, his rhetoric polished by years of private coaching and the unshakable certainty that came with privilege. The judges nodded appreciatively, captivated by his performance. William concluded with a flourish, his supporters rising to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to declare victory before the debate had truly begun. When Olivia approached the podium, the contrast was stark. The room fell into an expectant hush. She wore no designer label, carried no legacy name. For 3 excruciating seconds, she stood in silence, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. Then, her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Who gets to decide what integrity means?" she asked, her gaze sweeping across the judges before landing directly on William. "Is it those who've never had theirs questioned, or those who've had to fight for recognition of their very humanity?" The unexpected directness of her challenge sent a ripple through the audience. With methodical precision, Olivia began dismantling the notion that institutions like Yale were neutral arbiters of merit. She spoke of systemic barriers disguised as standards, of voices systematically silenced under the guise of tradition. Without once naming William, she described the sabotage she'd endured, the missing research materials, the locked study rooms, the whisper campaigns. "When someone feels threatened by your presence," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words, "they don't tell you that you don't belong. They create conditions that make it impossible for you to succeed, then point to your struggle as proof you never should have been there." Olivia braced herself as William approached the podium for cross-examination. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he immediately launched into his first question, cutting her off before she could even finish her response. "So you're suggesting that centuries of established economic theory should be dismissed because of your personal interpretation?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. The audience tensed. This was the moment many debates were won or lost. William's strategy was clear: interrupt her rhythm, force her into defensive positions, and make her lose her composure. "I'd appreciate if you'd let me finish my answers," Olivia replied evenly, maintaining eye contact. "And no, that's not what I suggested. I'm arguing that those theories must be re-examined in light of empirical evidence from the last decade." William pressed harder, interrupting her 3 more times in quick succession. Each time, Olivia calmly redirected, refusing to be rattled. When he deliberately mischaracterized her position on federal oversight, she didn't just correct him, she called him out. "That's the 3rd time you've shifted my argument to something I never claimed," she said, her voice firm but not angry. "The judges and audience deserve better than straw man tactics." A murmur rippled through the crowd, William's face tightened almost imperceptibly. When her rebuttal time came, Olivia approached the podium with quiet confidence. She systematically dismantled William's arguments, point by point, her voice growing stronger with each word. Then came her closing statement. If these institutions were perfect, I wouldn't have had to fight sabotage just to be heard today. The very resistance to examining these systems proves my point about institutional blindness. The words hung in the air. For the first time, William looked genuinely rattled, his usual poise momentarily shaken. He glanced down at his notes, then back up, his expression unreadable. The audience's response was immediate. This wasn't the polite, measured applause of academic courtesy. It was thunderous, a spontaneous recognition that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Even some of Yale's own students were on their feet. Professor Chen, seated among the judges, tried to maintain her professional neutrality, but Olivia caught the slight nod of approval. In that moment, Olivia knew that regardless of the final decision, she had already won something more important than a trophy. She had forced everyone in that room to truly listen. Backstage, Olivia sat on a cold bench, her hands trembling as the judges deliberated. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her face. She'd given everything she had in that final rebuttal, her research, her passion, her painful personal story. Now, all she could do was wait. William paced nearby, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible anxiety. He kept checking his phone, then shoving it back into his pocket, muttering something about statistical probability under his breath. "You did well out there," he finally said, not quite meeting her eyes. Olivia looked up, surprised. "Thanks. So did you. Not well enough, I think." He stopped pacing for a moment. "That thing about your cousin, that wasn't in your prep materials." "No," she said quietly. "Some arguments come from places statistics can't reach." The backstage door creaked open, and Professor Winters poked her head in. "They're ready," she said, her expression carefully neutral. Olivia's stomach clenched as she rose. The 20-foot walk back to the stage felt like crossing an ocean. The moderator called them back into the packed auditorium, where the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. Olivia spotted her roommate giving her a thumbs up from the third row. The sealed envelope arrived at the moderator's podium, carried by the head judge with ceremonial slowness, every eye in the room fixed on the stage. Olivia could feel her heartbeat in her throat, her fingertips behind her eyes. William stood ramrod straight beside her, his breathing shallow. "Before I announce the winner," the moderator said, "I want to acknowledge that this has been one of the most extraordinary final rounds in Yale's debate tournament history." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Someone in the back shouted, "Get on with it!" triggering nervous laughter. The moderator smiled and broke the seal on the envelope. The paper made a crisp sound as he unfolded it, the microphone amplifying the tension. Olivia closed her eyes for a brief moment, remembering the laughter when she'd first walked on stage months ago. How far she'd come since then. "The winner of this year's Yale Debate Championship is—" The room fell silent as the head judge cleared his throat. The tension was so thick Olivia could barely breathe, her fingers digging into her palms as she stood among the finalists. She'd come so far, from the girl they laughed at to standing here at Yale's most prestigious debate tournament final. But was it enough? "And the winner of this year's Ellsworth Debate Championship is—" The judge paused, his eyes scanning the room. "Olivia Johnson." For 3 heartbeats, Olivia stood frozen. She was certain she'd misheard, that her desperate wanting had twisted the words. But then the applause began, hesitant at first, then surging into a thunderous wave that crashed over her. This wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping she'd grown accustomed to. This was real. This was loud. This was overwhelming. From the corner of her eye, she saw William's face contort with disbelief before hardening into something ugly. He didn't bother with congratulations or even acknowledgement. He simply gathered his notes with jerky movements, knocking his water bottle to the floor, and stormed toward the exit. His footsteps echoed through the hall, the sound of his defeat complete and undeniable. As Olivia made her way to the podium, her legs somehow carrying her forward despite feeling like jelly, she caught sight of Professor Grant. The woman who had once seemed so intimidating now watched her with unmistakable pride. After Olivia accepted the trophy, heavier than she'd imagined, Professor Grant approached, extending her hand. "Congratulations," she said, her handshake firm and grounding. There was no effusive praise, no dramatic declaration. Instead, she offered something far more valuable. "You didn't just win, Johnson, you proved you belong." Those 6 words washed over Olivia like a benediction. Not despite your background, not even though you struggled, just simple acknowledgement of what she'd known all along, but had fought so hard to demonstrate. She belonged here, in these hallowed halls, in this intellectual arena, in this victory. As the crowd surrounded her with congratulations, Olivia clutched her trophy and realized that the journey that had begun with laughter now culminated in something far more powerful: respect. The cameras flashed incessantly as Olivia was swarmed by a sea of admirers. Hands reached out from every direction, some offering congratulations, others simply wanting to touch greatness. The weight of the trophy in her hands felt surreal. Tangible proof that she had done the impossible. In the midst of the chaos, she felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. Excusing herself from a particularly enthusiastic Yale alumnus, she checked the screen and saw her mother's message. "Told you, baby, never needed their permission to shine." The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. All those nights her mother had stayed up helping her practice. All those weekends driving her to local competitions. All those encouraging words when rejection letters came. It had all led to this moment. Olivia blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall, and found herself smiling wider than she had all week. This victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. As the crowd gradually dispersed and the excitement of the moment began to settle, Olivia found herself needing a moment alone. She slipped away from the reception hall and found refuge on the stone steps outside the building. The cool night air felt refreshing against her flushed skin. She closed her eyes, replaying the final moments of her argument in her mind, savoring the perfect silence that had fallen over the room when she'd finished. "There you are," came a familiar voice. Olivia opened her eyes to see Professor Grant approaching, her expression unreadable in the dim light. The professor settled beside her on the steps, both women looking out at the historic campus buildings illuminated against the night sky. "They found out who sent the fake email," Professor Grant finally said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Her tone carried an edge, a mixture of regret and satisfaction that made Olivia sit up straighter. It was William. He'll face consequences, but Yale handles things quietly. Olivia absorbed this information, surprised to find that it didn't affect her as much as she would have expected just days ago. William's attempt to sabotage her had ultimately pushed her to heights she might never have reached otherwise. The revelation didn't feel like vindication so much as the closing of a chapter, one that no longer defined her story. "What will you do now?" Professor Grant asked, studying Olivia's face carefully. "You've made quite an impression on some influential people tonight." Olivia stood at the window of her dorm room, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind Yale's Gothic spires. The aftermath of the tournament had been chaotic. Interviews, meetings with the ethics committee, and finally the official disqualification of Richardson and his team. She felt a strange emptiness where the anger had been. "You know," Grant said, joining her at the window, "I've been teaching here for 17 years, and I've never seen anyone handle that kind of pressure with such dignity." He leaned against the windowsill. Most adults I know would have either crumbled or gone scorched earth. Sometimes I wish I had, Olivia admitted. But then I'd be just like them. Wouldn't I? They stood in comfortable silence, watching the campus lights flicker on one by one. The debate hall was dark now, its moment of chaos already fading into university legend. Olivia knew that by next semester she'd be just another story that upperclassmen told freshmen during orientation. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Grant said, "you go home, finish high school, and decide which universities deserve the honor of your application." He smiled. "And you remember that winning isn't always about the trophy?" 3 weeks later, Olivia was back in her bedroom in New Orleans, the familiar sounds of jazz floating through her open window. Her debate trophies, modest compared to Yale's ornate cup, lined her bookshelf. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "Did you check the mail yet?" The envelope was thick, cream-colored with Yale's emblem embossed in blue. Inside was an official invitation to their prestigious summer program for exceptional high school students, with a full scholarship. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the corner. "The committee was unanimous. Your voice belongs here. Can't wait to see how far you'll go. Grant." Olivia traced her fingers over the emblem, remembering the whispers, the laughter, the moment she'd stepped onto that stage. She remembered the feeling of her voice growing stronger with each word, how the room had fallen silent, how even her opponents had looked up from their notes. She placed the invitation on her desk and smiled. The battle at Yale hadn't been about winning a tournament. It had been about claiming her space in a world that hadn't been built for her, about proving that a voice, once doubted, once mocked, could echo through even the most unwelcoming halls. And that was a victory no one could ever take away.